Hello, everyone. My name is Rewat Deonandan. I'm an epidemiologist and an associate professor with the Interdisciplinary School of Health Sciences at the University of Ottawa, and I've been asked to talk to you a little bit about my path through the labyrinthine avenues of science communication, especially in the context of the COVID-19 pandemic. So I've made this recording with slides and insights and stories, but I thought maybe you'd like to see my face before I switch over to actual slides that hopefully are more attractive. Um, my mic is drooping now, which is not an indicator of the quality of the presentation, I hope. So, here we are, my path to science communication. And I'm only talking here about the last 2 to 3 years when the pandemic has started, but frankly, I've been a science communicator throughout the entirety of my career. It just really heated up a lot in the last couple of years. In the last 3 years, I think I've done close to 3,000 media engagements. That includes spots on TV, radio, writing articles for the newspaper, advising journalists, and so forth. I lost count at around 2,000. So it's crazy. I've consulted on a number of lawsuits, including a murder trial, believe it or not, all related to COVID. I've advised media, drug companies, including vaccine manufacturers, labor unions, governments on aspects of COVID-19. And it's not that I'm particularly good at the science. I consider myself to be a mediocre scientist, to be honest. And COVID is not the number one thrust of my research. It's thus that I think I talk about it well. And what I hope will come out of some of my presentation is that you don't have to be the smartest guy in the room to be amongst the most useful. It's sometimes more useful to be able to express the content lucidly, and that is often more valuable than having genius level intellect and understanding of the content. I've also been answering scores, actually hundreds of questions from the public who reach out to me to discuss things about the pandemic. And that eats up a lot of time, but I try to do it as sensitively as I can. Sometimes, well, not sometimes, often I get a lot of abuse, but that's part of the game. So a lot of hate mail, the occasional threat of violence, which is not fun. And we tend to focus a lot on that, but frankly, I get a lot more positive feedback. I get a lot of letters and emails of gratitude, which I keep and I really appreciate. I've even gotten a few love letters, mostly from men, which is okay, but I'm straight, so it doesn't really do much for me. And it's been exhausting. Not gonna lie, it's been tiring. It's been stressful in my relationships. It's been a lot to handle. But I like to think that the net effect has been a positive on my life. It's really expanded my career and my horizons considerably, and it's allowed me to talk to students in a more effective way, in a more sensitive way, I think, and to guide you along certain career paths that I think would be useful to you. So I don't think I would have done much of anything differently in the last few years. A few things, absolutely, but the choice to get involved publicly, I think I would have kept. I think. Ask me this tomorrow and maybe I'll change my mind. So let's talk a little bit about the pandemic in general. Pandemics have a way of exacerbating, of making worse the existing divides in society. And these divides include ideological divides between left and right, liberal and conservative, Republican, Democrat, socioeconomic divides. It really has affected the poor in different ways than it has affected the wealthy. Ethnic divides, because ideology and socioeconomics tend to fall along ethnic lines. And pandemics have a way of revealing the vulnerability within our societies. So personal fragilities, who can handle it, who is more resilient, who has the resources to handle the stresses of pandemic better than others. And many relationships have been strained, interpersonal ones, professional ones, and so forth. As a result, emotions have been raw. I like to think we're recovering a little of that now, but we are in the pandemic is still happening, but much of the world believes that they're in the post-pandemic period, and there's a lot of recovery to be done. Everyone feels attacked, and it's a minefield out there to talk about anything, especially around science and especially around health science. I like to talk about Neil deGrasse Tyson. So if you don't know who this is, he's a famous astrophysicist, and he's always on TV. He's famous for saying a lot of things, including that scientists should make ourselves available to the public. When he goes to a pub, he likes people to know, hey, I'm an astrophysicist. Most people will never have a chance to meet an astrophysicist, so if you have a question, come ask me. I'll talk to you. That's great. He's right about that. The problem is that no one's identity or ideology or belief system is threatened by what exists on the other side of the event horizon of a black hole. The stakes are low when you're talking about astronomy and astrophysics. On the other hand, when you're talking about a pandemic or health sciences in general, everyone's got a take. Everyone has skin in the game. It's dangerous sometimes because people are going to disagree with you. They'll think you're a farmer shill or something like that. So it's not quite as straightforward as Dr. deGrasse Tyson will have us believe. I like this quote. COVID-19 is a case study in the interplay between contagion, information, misinformation, and behavior. It is not just about the virus. It is not just about the science. It's about the social science. It's about the politics. It's about the extent to which we as human beings and living relationship beings express ourselves and intertwine our lives. And COVID has really revealed and complicated much of that. So what's the role of someone who is choosing to communicate in public health during a crisis? I like to think that prior to the pandemic, we thought the role was pretty clear. We clarify the nature of the emergency. Hey, there's an earthquake, a volcano has erupted, there's a disease happening, whatever it might be. Create calmness, assuage panic, reassure people that the powers that be are on top of things and have a plan. Alert people to the status of the public health response. Hey, the feds are on their way with fresh water and life jackets or whatever the case might be, or vaccines being delivered. Inform people about what they need to do. Wear masks, stay home, whatever it might be, and maybe suggest timelines. We will have vaccine delivery in your area by this date of this year, whatever it might be. Sometimes you're called upon to educate the public about the underlying science, and that really came to the fore in the pandemic early on. People don't understand what a virus is, or how it's transmitted, or what an R factor is in epidemiology, or what antibodies are. We've really unearthed the depths of science literacy throughout all this, and a big part of what we do as communicators is to explain, to the extent that we are able to, what people need to understand to manage their lives. But what is the role of public health communications? Is it about changing behavior or informing people? Do you see the difference here? Maybe if I show you this image, the difference becomes more clear. This is cigarette packaging. There's a picture of a diseased black lung of a dead person on that cigarette packaging, clearly suggesting to people, if you smoke this product, you're going to die. This manner of communication is clearly aimed towards changing behavior. I want you to not use this product that I'm trying to sell you, right? And that's certainly valid for a lot of things, including communication around tobacco. In the pandemic, there is so much distrust of people in my position, scientists, the elite, government, whoever it might be, that the moment you start trying to coerce or change behavior, people put you in a category of a shill, of someone who's not to be trusted. So increasingly, I feel the role is simply to educate people, give them facts, and let them figure out what the risk profile is. Let them figure out what the appropriate behavioral response is. It's a delicate dance to do. And this is a controversial statement to make, but this is part of the tension here. Are we trying to change behavior, or are we simply sharing information? Even though I laid out to you a set of tasks for a public health communicator, we did not anticipate the role of misinformation and disinformation in all this. The difference here is misinformation is simply being wrong about something. Hey, the vaccines are changing your DNA. No, they're not. You just don't understand the way science works. Disinformation are people who understand how the science works and are intentionally saying the vaccine changes your DNA because they have a political or ideological agenda to play out here. We also did not anticipate the anti-authoritarian impulse, the extent to which people distrust figures of authority. And we are included in figures of authority, people with PhDs, people with some degree of expertise. So the second I'm on TV saying something, there's an army of people who distrust me because I'm on TV saying something and will do the exact opposite of what I say. This was not anticipated in any of the public health communication textbooks. The disinformation campaigns have been troubling, and they're getting worse. Those actors who are seeking to flood the airwaves with wrongness have weaponized social media. That is their platform of choice. Science by YouTube video and by meme is extremely effective, much more effective than science by peer-reviewed paper. So right now, public health communication, science communication in general, is being reimagined along these new battle fronts. It won't surprise you to know that much of the disinformation around COVID has come from foreign actors. There's a lot of evidence from our intelligence agencies that certain countries, among them Russia, were behind much of the amplification of misinformation in order to create chaos in our political system, to weaken their political opponents. Not surprising. So how did I get here? That's not me, by the way. I'm in much better shape than this guy, but it's not too far off. Early in the pandemic, in early 2020, I was on paternity leave because my spouse was pregnant with our first child, and I wasn't paying that much attention. My students were emailing me about this virus that had been reported in China, and I took some notice, and I told them, look, the officials have this on hand, just do what public health tells you, you'll be fine. Then around February, when the data started coming in, and when we were told to maybe stay home for a little while, I did some math. I stayed up late one night, and I did my own modeling, and to my horror, I realized what the government epidemiologists had also realized, but that had not yet made it into mass media, that this disease will not be over in a few weeks or in a few months. It's going to be years. And it is so lethal and so contagious. And by the way, it's a lot more contagious now than it was in 2020. But back then, it was looking pretty scary. It was so lethal and contagious that I was worried that my child might never meet his grandparents, meaning that my parents would die before my kid was released from quarantine, because we're all going to be hiding in our homes for so many months. At the time, the media was talking about weeks, but I knew it was months. And so I couldn't see a way out of this without a vaccine. And current estimates at the time were that a vaccine would not be available for another 4 years. We all know that a vaccine came later that same year, but at the time, no. So my spouse found me the next morning literally in the fetal position on the floor, because I had this awful truth that very few other people in the world were privy to at the moment. Right. So I wrote a blog post. I have a blog. My blog is about, my dog, the TV shows that I watch, stupid jokes I might tell, and I get maybe 200 readers per week. But the blog post I wrote was this. And the reason I wrote it was, again, I was going to be a father, and I'm an epidemiologist, and I imagined my son asking me 20 years later, Dad, you're an epidemiologist. What did you do in the great pandemic of 2020? And I can't say I watched Netflix with you. I had to say, well, I tried something. And I wasn't a COVID expert at the time. I am now, I think. Um, so what skill did I have? Well, I'm a communicator. I communicate things well. I think I explain things well. And so I decided, well, I'm going to explain things to people who want to hear it. So I wrote this blog post, and this blog post was called COVID-19, What's the End Game? And in this post, I explained what herd immunity is, how modeling works, what the probable pathway of this pandemic will be. And to my surprise and horror, I got 500,000 reads in that 1 week. 500,000. That was crazy, right? And so the phone started ringing. Journalists started calling me asking for commentary. Because you may not remember, but back then, no scientists were speaking to media. No one was saying anything. Even on Twitter, it was almost impossible to find any scientists doing any sort of commentary because, frankly, we didn't know. We didn't know anything. And scientists are used to speaking authoritatively about things we're actually confident about. So, when I started going public, people came looking for commentary. The misinformation started coming at me fast then. So you might remember these dudes. There are these doctors who run an urgent care center in California, big Trump supporters, and they had done some very bad math in March of 2020, where they said the pandemic is over. They had mistaken the test positivity rate for a prevalence estimate. And Fox News was all over them saying, these guys are right, the pandemic is over. Why have we shut down the country when everyone's been infected already? Of course they were wrong. Of course they were wrong. And I wrote a blog post explaining why they were wrong. I broke it down step by step. And this got me the attention of the Americans. And boy, that was interesting, because another 500,000 readers, and with the American attention came a lot of abuse. A lot of abuse. A lot of racist attacks, a lot of name calling. It's fascinating watching that happen, realizing just how polarized the world was and how quick they were to attack the messenger. Fascinating, right? So, some thoughts on public health communication. Communication interventions do not fall into a social vacuum. What does that mean? It means that information is received through whatever lens you have in your life. As a result, what I say may not be what you hear. You're going to hear it through your political prism. So you have to take that in consideration somehow. Every audience is different, which means you've got to tailor-make the messaging for different kinds of audiences. What I say to media is not exactly the same as what I will say to policymakers or to fellow scientists or even to the layperson, because the expertise level is not there and the inability to disentangle personal bias from messaging is going to be variable as well. Talking to media is really dangerous too, because they will take things out of context. So you've got to be really careful what you say and say it in such a way that they cannot, or they're less likely to misconstrue it. It's not intentional. It's not intentional on their part. They've got a certain length limit. They have a certain framework for storytelling they've got to use. So they'll pluck a quote out of what you just said as it fits into a story they're already making. Or the editor will write the title of an article for them that is the most inciting and often is not what I'm trying to say. And I've had arguments with journalists a couple times where the title has been completely misrepresenting what I've said, and they've always changed it. So what's the role of the science communicator? And I've struggled with this. Is it to combat misinformation? Yeah, sometimes. Is it to interpret science? Yeah, sometimes. Is it to massage the message? I don't think so, but some people will say that it is. And what does that mean, massaging the message? It means making something palatable. So, hey, lockdowns happened. Is it my job to sell that to people, saying, yeah, we're locking down society, and you'll lose your job, and you'll be unhappy, and your kid will be screaming at you because he can't go to school. But you know what? It's for your own good, and you should be happy we're doing it. I think that's being a mouthpiece for the state, and I'm not comfortable in that role. So I don't think it is the role of the science communicator. It's the role of the government communicator. Is our role to dumb down something? I don't like that phrase. I think if Einstein said, if you cannot, as a scientist, explain your theories to, he used the term bar wench, at the local pub, then you don't really understand your theories. Obviously, that phraseology would be sexist today. I would say if I need to, quote unquote, dumb something down, then I don't really understand it myself. I would rather say my role is to express a concept in human language. If I have to resort to jargon, then I'm cheating. Is it self-promotion? I think many people will accuse us of being self-promoters. The fact that those of us who have commented on COVID in the public are recognizable, our names are known, that's not a good thing. I don't think that's something to be sought after. In fact, in many ways, it makes us vulnerable. But there's no denying there is some promotion going on. Is it to promote the profession? I think so. I see my role as being a little bit a champion of health scientists and of epidemiologists. I recognize that much of the world has never heard of the term epidemiologist before, and I might be the first one they ever see on TV or whose voice they might ever hear, so I take that responsibility seriously. Is it to push an agenda? Maybe. That agenda to me is that science is a set of paradigms and values and processes, and I think everyone should understand what those paradigms, processes are. That is the agenda that I have, and I think everyone who speaks in public has some kind of agenda. I think it behooves us to take some time to explore what that agenda is, and often it is an unconscious one. What are the tools of the trade? All right. The op-ed, the opinion editorial, used to be the grand champion of science communication for the public. An opinion editorial is an article you write for the newspaper. That is your opinion. And it's written in human language that most people can understand. It's not quite as powerful as it used to be because the internet has overtaken newspapers. But as recently as 10 years ago, that would have been the number one way to go. I still like op-eds. Op-eds are a way to set the agenda for a conversation. And it's respectable. So I have good relationships now with editors, and they will contact me regularly to say, can you write an op-ed on this topic? I think the most recent one I wrote was, I don't really remember what it was, on, I think, what must we do next to prepare against the next pandemic. They've asked me to write on whether or not we should be vaccine shopping, or the myocarditis issues with the vaccination. So they call upon me to write these opinion editorials that can be shared. Right? People retweet them all the time, and it's used as touchstones for other stories they might tell. Podcasts are great. I've been a guest on a number of podcasts. They're not quite as penetrative as you might think. They're not quite as shareable. People don't really have the same kind of attention span to sit down and listen to the 3-hour Joe Rogan podcast. Some people do, but not many. So an op-ed is more shareable, but podcasts have a role to play, absolutely. Tweet threads are fantastic. So very often I'd write like a 5 to 12 tweet thread explaining something like why masks work, despite what the new Cochrane review might say. What steps you should take to choose which vaccine to get. Something stupid like that. That's not a good example. But many scientists use tweet threads now. It's shareable and it's understandable in a corpuscular way. Facebook, I think, is still great because Facebook, I can control the virality well. I can set what level of sharing I want to make this. My friends, public, exclude somebody, and I can control the length of something and then tweet the link out as well. So I'm not limited to the length that Twitter has. So Facebook's been very good. I get, when something is public though, then the trolls come for me there as well. So you have to really protect yourself. What I've learned that blog posts can be crazy powerful. 200 readers to 500,000 readers in 1 week. And I don't need an editor. It doesn't go through a newspaper. I control everything. Social media is the battlefield. Will it always be? I don't know. Social media is in flux at the moment, but right now it certainly is, and we need to have boots on the ground there. We need to have soldiers in that battlefield who understand social media. I just use Twitter and Facebook and Mastodon. I don't use TikTok or Instagram. I can't be bothered. So another generation will be more astute at these things than I am. Op-eds have diminished power, but they are really still good at setting the agenda and of establishing legitimacy. And we should expect abuse. Which takes me to one of the things I think students should consider when they are embarking on this kind of career. And by the way, I will add, you should embark on this kind of career. It is almost unavoidable. Any scientist of the next generation cannot avoid commenting in public, I don't think. If it's going to be something that is at the heart of your activities, I really am advocating for the inclusion of some sort of philosophical training among students, by which I mean some way to center yourself to not take the abuse seriously. I rely a lot on Stoicism. Stoicism is a philosophical school that comes out of ancient Rome. Epictetus, Marcus Aurelius, essentially states that worry about things you can control. Don't spend your time worrying about things outside your control. I can't control other people's opinions. I can't control what's in their hearts. I can only control my responses, my effort, and my attitude. That's all I can control. And I find that to be a very calming kind of reality, not just in this context, but across my entire life. So I advocate that everyone learn some sort of philosophical tradition that keeps you grounded and prevents stupid things like hate tweets from getting under your skin. What I've learned that we have a crisis in science education without a doubt. Too many people don't understand the basics of science or even what science is. Science is not a set of facts. Science is a process for learning. We have a crisis in trust. Trust in scientists, trust in public health, trust in government, trust in media, trust in the elite. And, my friends, you are amongst the elite because you have achieved a scientific education. No one really knows how to fix this. We've all got some ideas, but no one's quite sure yet. So we're in for a rough ride next few years or decades. And we're in big trouble for the next public health crisis. So I hope your generation is acquiring the tools to help us dig ourselves out of the next crisis. Social media is a huge challenge. A YouTube clip reaches millions of people in minutes. A peer-reviewed scientific paper reaches a handful of people over the course of weeks or months. So you can see that a dedicated set of misinformation merchants will put together a really sweet YouTube clip saying stupid stuff about vaccines, for example, and suddenly it's shared by millions of people. And proper science is done with a boring paper that no one's ever going to read. So we've lost that battle. Right? The average peer-reviewed paper is read by 2 people, according to at least one study. More lessons. Social media has been weaponized by the disinformation merchants. I've said that already. They capitalize on low scientific literacy. I think we can inoculate the public, pun intended, against disinformation by increasing science literacy. This is a decades-long endeavor. We have to start now by improving our educational infrastructure. This all exacerbates the political divisions and distrust. And that's intentional. And real science is at a disadvantage because real science is dry. It's not fun, but we can make it fun. We can make it fun, or at least less dry, by remembering the essence of communication, which is we all learn by narrative, by story structure. So this is where journalists really come in handy in helping us talk about science. Solutions? I don't know. But some of the things I've learned is I don't fight anger with anger. If someone sends me hate mail, I try not to send hate back. I don't always succeed. I'm human. I do fail at times. But I try to smother the hate with compassion and reason. Someone calls me names and says it's my fault that they lost their job in the pandemic. Obviously, it's not my fault. I didn't cause a pandemic. I didn't cause the lockdowns. But they see the talking head on TV, and I'm the guy they choose to hate. So I sent back a message saying, I'm sorry you lost your job, and things are rough, and I feel for you. Blah 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 blah. Whatever. Data do not compel people. We can publish all kinds of numbers about how great vaccines are and what low risk they are, etc. But that's not going to move any hearts. Stories convince people. Narrative convinces people, which is why the anti-vaxxers and anti-science people have such a great advantage, because they tell stories. They have to tell stories because they don't have data. We can't always be responding to misinformation. We're always playing catch up. The damage is already done by the time some misinformation story gets out there. So we have to be proactive and flood the airwaves with accurate information. Who's got the resources and time for this? Not me. This has to be something government does. What else have I learned? Well, one tool won't reach everyone. Government creates a website, big deal. They've got a official Twitter feed, big deal. That's not going to do anything. We need a lot of tools in play. I mentioned a few of them already: op-eds, tweets, podcasts, whatever it might be. What I tell to my epi students is beware of being everyone's personal epidemiologist. I'm the only epidemiologist most people know now, and so I get endless epidemiology questions. It eats up all my time. You got to set some boundaries. As I mentioned, distrust of experts is at epidemic levels, and if you happen to be one that some people trust, well, suddenly you've got a lot more responsibility on your plate. So when speaking to the general public, I try hard not to rise to the bait. What I mean by that is someone will prod me, insult me, etc. It takes a lot of restraint not to take the bait. Maybe you've seen this one thing that I did. I commented at the local school trustee meeting about mask mandates, and it was a nightmare. There were people shouting and screaming, and it made national news. And I tried my hardest to sit there with a neutral face and stay calm. But it was hard because you want to shout back, but you can't. You have to be the calm adult in the room. So be polite and humble as best you can. It can be hard. Remember that people will send you the same question. Like 100 different people will send you the same question over a period of 48 hours because they don't know other people are asking you the same thing. And it's hard not to get lippy and impatient with them. Right? And that takes a lot of discipline there. So what's my role? I don't know. Sometimes I think my role is to criticize the power structures, and maybe it's to toe the line to say, no, you should, get the vaccine, whatever it might be. I don't know what my role is. I think my role is to be true to myself and to talk about science as I understand it. And I think that really is the only path forward for somebody like me. Is there's so much distrust right now that the best way to win trust is through authenticity. And you express authenticity by being true to yourself and by talking about what you want to talk about. Not massaging a message, not seeking an agenda, just saying, hey, I read a paper today and it says this, and this is what I think it means, and this is what I think you should take away from this as a member of the public. Here's an example of some of the fun emails I get. Someone calls me that and tells me I'm going to be prosecuted in Nuremberg for war crimes because I went on the radio and talked about vaccines. Yeah, that's right. And my response is, hello, thank you for your email. And I just explain the science and be done with it. I don't acknowledge the fact that you just said I'm a war criminal and call me racist names. Just let it go. So why do I do it? Why did I get involved in the first place? I think I have a moral responsibility to see taxpayers get a return on their investment. A chunk of my salary as a professor comes from the taxpayers, and I'm expected to teach students, to do research, and so forth. But also, in times of public crisis, if I have expertise, I'm expected to offer that expertise to my community. So that is my moral responsibility. And I feel I do have expertise in communication. And so I offer it. Things that are obvious to some with my training are not obvious to other people. And that's been shocking to discover. And so it's my responsibility to point those things out. Yeah? And people needed us. So when people need you, I think you got to step forward as much as it can be painful. A bunch of my grad students early in the pandemic really wanted to get involved also, and they felt they didn't have the expertise. And I told them, no, of course you've got the expertise. Of course you do. If you have a basic undergrad appreciation, understanding of science, that's what people wanted to hear early on. Explain to me what a virus is. Explain to me how transmission works. Explain what this word means, whatever it is. Explain how vaccines are developed and why I shouldn't be afraid of these effects, or maybe I should be afraid of these effects. Any undergrad can explain that. But then later on, they saw all the hate I was getting, and they all backed away. I don't want to get involved. I don't want to get involved. And that's been unfortunate to watch. I'm really quite concerned that the next generation of students and scientists won't want to put their face forward to be advocates for public health or science in general. And that is troubling. So I'm hoping that these moral arguments will win the day, and we can invest in the philosophical training that allows students to be resilient against potential abuse. So how did I get here? I didn't just start out as an epidemiologist and as a blogger. I was a writer first. So I wrote throughout my entire career. So I could be a rapid communicator. So this sort of thing appeals to you. What I encourage you to do is to learn to communicate. And even if you don't want to be a public communicator, you have to learn how to communicate. No matter what career path you take, communication is going to be a critical tool in your kit. I've been involved in hiring for private sector, public sector, NGOs, the whole gamut. And one thing we never train scientists to do formally is to communicate, and yet that is often number 1, 2, or 3 skill that we ask for in a job ad. And communication can be speaking, it can be interpersonal stuff. Very often it's writing grants, writing reports, writing précis, which is a summary of a lot of material into a small document. And very often it's communicating to a variety of audiences. So writing for the media, for policymakers, for funders, for lay public. So if you can learn to write for a variety of audiences, you're doing fine. For me, I was writing since I was a small child, but when I went to university, I wrote for all the student papers, and I made all of my mistakes there. So by the time I graduated, I had a portfolio of fairly professionally written articles, and so I could jump right into writing for international newspapers quite easily. If you're a student right now, nothing prevents you from becoming a top-notch writer right now. You've got the time, you have the path. Just write every single day. It's a muscle. Flex that muscle and it'll get stronger. Trust me, it totally will. It's a great investment for whatever career path you decide to take next. So, my conclusions. What we have is a crisis of trust in the world. How do you build back trust? Well, you refuse to fight people who just want to pick fights with you, first of all. Try to be the adult in the room. Listen. Show compassion. Be transparent with who you are, what you know, what you don't know. And I think strive for authenticity. This is hard. I'm not going to lie to you, but it's very rewarding. And I think it's unavoidable that students will have to seek some aspect of this activity going forward. And that is all, and I hope you have some questions for me. Thank you very much.